Dorian Sloane was the last human, or so it seemed. In a galaxy far from the human homeworld, Earth had been reduced to little more than a fading memory. The Oraxians, a race of cold and calculating conquerors, had decimated humanity in a series of brutal wars. Now, only a few scattered pockets of survivors remained, fighting for survival in a universe that no longer cared. Dorian, however, was not just a survivor, he was humanity's last diplomat. The last hope for a peaceful future, or so he liked to believe. A man of deep conviction, Dorian was a seasoned diplomat, one of the few humans still alive who remembered the importance of words over weapons. Despite the overwhelming odds, he believed in peace. His diplomatic efforts had spanned many years, trying to form fragile alliances with the alien species left in the galaxy. But each attempt had failed. The galaxy had moved on, and humanity was seen as weak, even irrelevant. Even in the face of this harsh reality, Dorian never wavered. He felt the weight of the mission, a constant reminder that his actions, or lack thereof, could determine the survival of the human race. The galaxy was in a state of chaos. The Oraxians' empire had spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Other factions, desperate to maintain power, fought endless battles. Humanity's remnants, too few to ever hope to challenge the Oraxians, were scattered in the farthest reaches of space, barely clinging to life. Dorian stood at the forefront of humanity's fragile hope. His goal was simple: unite what was left of humanity and rebuild a place in the galaxy, all while navigating the complex political landscapes of a universe that viewed them as nothing more than relics of a bygone era. But one fateful day, everything changed. Dorian received a message from a place long forgotten by everyone but the dead. Hidden deep within the ruins of a defunct human research station on the edge of the galaxy, the transmission had been dormant for centuries. At first, it was nothing more than a jumble of static, the remnants of a lost past. But when Dorian's ship, the Horizon, deciphered the code, a new understanding swept through him. The message was a warning, yes, but it was more than that. It was a call for help, an encrypted plea from a group of humans who had hidden themselves away in the darkest corners of space after the war. The words, though fragmented, spoke of a weapon. But not just any weapon, this was an ancient force capable of altering the very fabric of civilizations. A weapon of unimaginable power, once crafted by humanity, but abandoned due to its devastating potential. The message went on to say that the Oraxians had discovered its existence and were searching for it, determined to use it to solidify their control over the galaxy. As Dorian listened to the message, his mind raced. The implications were staggering. The weapon wasn't just a tool for destruction, it was something far worse. A psychological force designed to manipulate and control minds. A weapon that could erase free will, bend entire species to its will, and reshape the very structure of society. It wasn't just a question of survival anymore. This weapon, if activated, could tilt the balance of power in the galaxy beyond recognition. The more Dorian dug into the research station's archives, the more he uncovered. The weapon had been conceived long before the Oraxian invasion, during a time when humanity's future seemed full of possibilities. It was part of a failed project, one that had been abandoned in the face of its potential for unchecked destruction. A faction of humans, those who were blinded by the desire to defeat the Oraxians at any cost, had pushed for its activation, believing that it was the only way to bring an end to the war. But those who understood its true nature had hidden it away, believing that the consequences of its use were too great. Dorian stared at the holographic images of the weapon as they flickered on his ship's terminal, his stomach churning. Humanity had built this. They had created something that could destroy entire cultures, erase free will, and manipulate the very core of consciousness. It was a reminder of the darker side of human ambition, a reminder of how far they had fallen. Now it was his choice to make. The weapon could change the course of the galaxy's future, no question about it. The Oraxians wanted it, and if they gained control of it, nothing would stand in their way. With this weapon in their hands, they could impose their iron grip on the galaxy, wiping out any resistance, manipulating anyone who dared oppose them. The galaxy would fall into a new kind of order, one dictated not by wars, but by the sheer will of a single race. Humanity, in the end, would be nothing but a forgotten echo in the halls of time. But Dorian wasn't sure he could trust himself with such power. He was no warrior. He was a diplomat, someone who had spent his entire life negotiating, listening, and seeking understanding. He had avoided war at all costs. The very thought of using this weapon, this mind-altering force, sickened him. It went against everything he stood for. The questions kept coming. Could humanity survive without this weapon? Was there another way? Should he risk everything, use it to stop the Orcs and restore some kind of balance? Or should he leave it buried, a dangerous relic that no one should ever have access to, no matter the cost? Dorian's moral compass was torn. He had always believed that humanity's greatest strength lay in its capacity for understanding, in its ability to rise above the violence and hatred that plagued the galaxy. But the more he thought about the weapon, the more he realized that he was on the edge of something much bigger than himself. His decision could change the future of humanity, but it could also destroy everything he had worked so hard to protect. The clock was ticking. The Orcs were getting closer, and Dorian had no idea what the right choice was. But the question loomed in his mind, was humanity truly worthy of its place in the galaxy? Or had they already made the fatal mistake of thinking that peace could only be achieved through violence? The news came like a strike to Dorian's heart. The words echoed in his mind, reverberating against the walls of his once steady resolve. Lyra, his closest ally, had betrayed him. All this time, the sharp-witted diplomat from the Drexian Confederacy, whom Dorian had trusted with his life and mission, had been working against him. "I'm not who you think I am," Lyra said coldly, her eyes flickering with a mixture of regret and determination. "I'm not here to save humanity. I'm here to ensure the Orcs win." Dorian staggered back as the weight of her words sank in. He had spent months negotiating with Lyra, trying to unite the galaxy's remaining factions against the Orcs. Together, they had forged fragile alliances, promising a future of peace and cooperation. But now, it felt like the ground beneath his feet was crumbling. Lyra had been feeding him lies, playing her role as the idealistic diplomat to perfection. The real purpose of her involvement, however, had been far darker, to destabilize the delicate relationships he had worked so hard to build. Lyra's confession revealed that she was part of a hidden faction within the Drexian Confederacy, one that had long been loyal to the Orcs. They believed that the Orcs, with their superior technology and unyielding will, were the natural rulers of the galaxy. Rather than seeing the weapon as a threat, the faction had seen it as an opportunity to help the Orcs strengthen their hold over the universe. If humanity got its hands on the weapon, it could shift the balance of power. But if the Orcs controlled it, they would be unstoppable. For Dorian, it was as if the universe had tilted on its axis. The weapon he had been so desperate to find was not just a bargaining chip for peace. It was the key to a much larger scheme, a tool for universal domination. The Orcs, who had been hunting it relentlessly, had no intention of letting humanity regain its power. Instead, they planned to use it against the entire galaxy. Dorian's thoughts spiraled. He had been so sure of his mission, so certain that he was working toward a better future for humanity. But now, the weapon he thought would be humanity's salvation seemed like a harbinger of destruction. The Orcs wanted it to crush any opposition, to impose their brutal will on every corner of the galaxy. And Lyra, the one person he had trusted more than anyone, had been orchestrating this all along. The betrayal sent shockwaves through Dorian's inner circle. His crew, those who had followed him for so long, began to question everything. They had all believed in his vision of peace, of rebuilding humanity's place in the galaxy. But now, with Lyra's revelation, that vision seemed increasingly unrealistic. Captain Moline, his second-in-command, stood in front of him, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Dorian, this changes everything," she said, her voice strained. "You're not just fighting the Orcs anymore. You're caught in a web of deceit. How can we trust anything now? How can we trust you?" Dorian's heart clenched at the doubt in her voice. Malin had been by his side through countless challenges, and the trust they shared had been one of the few things keeping him grounded. Now, that trust was fracturing. The weight of her question echoed in his mind. Could he still maintain his moral code, or was he now a pawn in a much larger game? Some of the crew, like Malin, began to see Dorian's pursuit of the weapon as a fool's errand, a reckless chase that would only lead to more destruction. They feared that the weapon, in the hands of humanity or the Oraxians, would only bring about more violence, more suffering. Others, though, remained loyal to Dorian's vision, believing that the weapon could still be humanity's last chance to strike back. But with the betrayal hanging over them, even these loyalists were divided. Dorian found himself at an impossible crossroads. His lifelong belief in diplomacy, in peace above all else, was being torn apart. He had always held the conviction that violence was never the answer, that understanding, dialogue, and compromise were the only true paths to survival. But now, he had to confront the painful truth that peace, in a galaxy ruled by power and manipulation, might be an illusion. Was it possible to negotiate with beings like the Oraxians? Was peace a construct, a fragile dream that couldn't withstand the harsh realities of the universe? He thought back to the many hours he had spent debating the future of humanity with Lyra. How many times had he relied on her insights, her wisdom, believing she shared his vision? How many moments had he trusted her judgment as they worked side by side? All of that now felt like a lie. Lyra had never believed in humanity's future. She had never wanted peace. She had only ever wanted to see the Oraxians ascend. As Dorian wrestled with the revelation, a new layer of complexity emerged. He realized that his own ideals, the very foundation of his beliefs, were under attack not just from the Oraxians, but from within. Could he really stand by his commitment to peace, knowing that it might lead to humanity's demise? Was he prepared to fight fire with fire, to embrace the very brutality he had always fought against in order to protect what little remained of humanity? And yet, even as he grappled with his moral dilemma, another question gnawed at him. Could the weapon ever be used for something other than destruction? Was there another way to stop the Oraxians without succumbing to their methods? He knew that the stakes had changed. This was no longer just about saving humanity. This was about saving the very essence of what made them human, their ability to choose, to act with compassion, and to preserve their autonomy. Dorian stood at the edge of a precipice. His faith in diplomacy was crumbling, and with it, the galaxy, it seemed, was forcing him to choose between his ideals and the harsh realities of survival. Could he live with the consequences of that choice? As the tension among his crew reached a boiling point, Dorian made a silent vow. He would find another way, no matter what it took. There had to be a path that didn't lead to the annihilation of everything he held dear. But whether that path still existed or if it had been destroyed long ago was something only the future could reveal. The lines between ally and enemy had blurred, and in this fractured galaxy, the very idea of peace had become the greatest weapon of all. Dorian had always believed in peace as a force that could transcend all boundaries. He had fought for it, longed for it, and tirelessly worked to make it a reality in a galaxy filled with endless conflict. But nothing could have prepared him for the truth he uncovered as he dug deeper into the weapon's origins. First, the weapon seemed like any other a tool of mass destruction, capable of reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy. A force so potent that it could wipe out entire civilizations, a weapon that would ensure the survival of humanity or crush the Oraxians once and for all. But as Dorian pieced together the final pieces of the puzzle, a chilling revelation gripped him. The weapon wasn't a weapon at all, not in the traditional sense. It was alive. The hidden archives in the long-forgotten research station revealed the true nature of the weapon, a sentient organism, capable of interacting with the minds of those around it. It was not simply a force of destruction, it was a living being, an entity designed to reshape the very fabric of consciousness across the galaxy. When activated, it would seep into the minds of every sentient creature, weaving itself into their thoughts, beliefs, and desires, until it had altered the entire collective consciousness of the galaxy. Dorian sat in stunned silence as the implications of this hit him. The weapon had not been designed for conquest. It wasn't meant to annihilate civilizations or dominate the galaxy. Its purpose was something far more insidious, and yet, in a strange way, noble. The entity, which had been programmed long ago, sought to erase conflict. It sought to end the cycle of war and suffering by removing the very concept of conflict from every sentient mind. With it, the galaxy would no longer know hatred, violence, or division. The weapon would create a utopia, one of peace, unity, and harmony. For the first time, Dorian found himself considering it. A galaxy-wide peace, free from the bloodshed and destruction that had defined the past centuries. No more Oraxians. No more factions vying for control. No more wars. The very thing he had spent his life fighting for, it seemed, was within his grasp. But as the truth of the weapon settled in, Dorian felt a growing sense of dread. He understood the weapon's potential, but he also understood its cost. Peace, he realized, came with a price one far steeper than he had ever imagined. When the weapon activated, when it took root in the minds of every sentient being, it wouldn't just erase conflict. It would erase individuality. It would strip every creature of their autonomy, their free will. People would no longer have the capacity to choose their paths, to define their beliefs, or to shape their own destinies. They would be part of a collective consciousness, a vast and unified entity, bound by a singular peaceful purpose. The weapon would create peace, yes, but at the cost of everything that made sentient beings truly alive, their ability to think, to dream, to fight for what they believed in. Dorian couldn't bring himself to accept that reality. The thought of millions, billions of beings losing their individuality in exchange for a peace that came without choice, without freedom, it filled him with a profound sadness. Was peace really worth that? Was it worth the destruction of everything that made life meaningful, that made existence rich and diverse? He thought back to the long nights he had spent negotiating with various alien species. He remembered the discussions about peace, about the hope that humanity could one day rise again, not just as a species of survivors, but as a beacon for others to follow. But he had never imagined that peace could come at such a terrible cost. He had thought of peace as something that emerged through understanding, through compromise. He never considered that it could be imposed upon the universe like a cold, unyielding tide, sweeping away all differences in its path. The more Dorian thought about it, the clearer it became. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a prison. The peace it promised was a hollow peace, one that would suffocate the very essence of life. It would create a galaxy of contented drones, living in unison, without conflict, without struggle, without choice. But it would also erase the spirit that made life vibrant, the diversity of thought, the ability to question, to dream, to fight for one's beliefs. The weapon's promise of peace seemed like a cruel joke. The very essence of what made sentient beings unique would be stripped away. The galaxy would be devoid of the richness that came with different perspectives, different cultures, and different ideals. It would be a peaceful universe, yes, but it would be a stagnant one, a place where free will had been sacrificed for the sake of tranquility. Dorian's moral compass, once so sure of its direction, had shattered. He had believed that the end of war was the ultimate goal. But now, he was confronted with a painful truth. Peace, in its truest form, might not be worth the price of humanity's soul. The thought of turning the weapon on, of erasing the diversity of the galaxy to create a perfect peace, filled him with revulsion. It wasn't just the Oraxians who posed a threat to the galaxy. It was the very idea that peace could be imposed through force. The weapon, for all its promises of salvation, would destroy the very thing that made beings sentient, their autonomy, their ability to choose their destiny. But in the cold, calculating silence of space, another thought arose: what choice did he have? The Oraxians were still a force in the galaxy. Their empire continued to expand, their cruelty unchecked. Could humanity, or any other species, survive without a drastic measure? The thought of eternal war, of endless suffering, was almost unbearable. What was worse, to preserve free will, knowing it would lead to more destruction and death, or to sacrifice that freedom for the greater good. The dilemma was inescapable. In order to preserve freedom, Dorian would have to keep the weapon hidden, destroy it, and risk leaving the galaxy in chaos. But if he activated the weapon, he would bring about peace, but at the cost of everything that made the galaxy worth saving. In that moment of quiet reflection, Dorian realized that there was no simple answer. There was no right choice. He could only follow his conscience, knowing that whatever path he chose, the galaxy would be forever altered. The question that remained was not whether peace could be achieved, but whether it could be achieved at the cost of the very essence of life itself. He closed his eyes and asked himself one final question. Is it worth it? And as he stared into the vast, endless expanse of space, the weight of the universe seemed to press down on him, offering no easy answer. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, stretched endlessly before Dorian Sloane as he stood on the bridge of his lone ship, the Eclipse. The stars shimmered coldly in the distance, a cruel reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that was still at stake. He had made his decision. The weapon, the sentient organism capable of reshaping the minds of all sentient beings, would not be activated. He couldn't bring himself to wield such power, no matter how tempting it was to end the cycle of war once and for all. Peace, he had realized, was not something that could be forced. It wasn't a prize to be won or a tool to be wielded. True peace had to come from within, from the hearts and minds of those who lived in the galaxy. If that peace was ever to be achieved, it could only be a choice made by every species, every race, not imposed by a single entity, no matter how benevolent it might seem. With a heavy heart, Dorian locked the weapon away in a secure vault aboard his ship, where it would remain hidden, its secrets buried. He would never allow it to be used. To him, it represented the very thing that had brought humanity to the brink of extinction. The desire to control the fate of others. ASE stood in the dim glow of the Eclipse's control room. Dorian composed a message, one that he knew would resonate through the galaxy. It wasn't a message of hope or a call for peace. It was a warning. He didn't have the power to dictate peace for the entire galaxy, nor did he have the right to do so. But he could still speak out, still remind the universe of its responsibility to choose its own fate. Peace, his voice crackled over the comms, can only exist when all races, all species, choose it for themselves. We will continue to suffer, yes, but we will do so with the knowledge that we are not bound to a never-ending cycle of violence. The choice is ours. We must be better than this. He sent the message across the stars, his words cutting through the void. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a solution. It was just a simple truth. He had chosen to preserve humanity's right to choose its own path, free from the shadow of the weapon. Peace, in its truest form, would never be a mandate. It would always be a choice. But Dorian's message was not met with the quiet acceptance he had hoped for. The following days were filled with a growing sense of unease, as he received word that the message had been intercepted. To his shock, a new faction, one he had never anticipated, came forward, the remnants of the human resistance. They had found the weapon. Dorian had kept the weapon hidden, believing he had sealed away the galaxy's future, protecting it from the dangerous temptation of its power. But the resistance, a loose group of survivors, had discovered the weapon's existence. And now, they had a plan to use it not to end war, not to impose peace on the galaxy, but to take control of it. They believed they could harness the power of the weapon. With their knowledge of the weapon's capabilities, they saw it not as a force of peace, but as a tool for power, something that could help them rebuild humanity's empire, this time under their own rule. Dorian's stomach sank as he realized the consequences of his decision. He had made the choice to hide the weapon, to prevent anyone from using it. But now, the worst possible outcome had occurred. The very thing he had sought to prevent, a new war, one even more devastating than before, was about to unfold. The human resistance, emboldened by their discovery, had declared their intentions. They had already begun preparations to activate the weapon, to manipulate the minds of the galaxy's inhabitants, to erase all resistance and unite them under one banner. It was an old, familiar temptation to believe that controlling others would create peace. But Dorian knew it would only lead to a different kind of conflict, one where freedom was sacrificed for the illusion of security. Dorian's first instinct was to confront the resistance. He gathered what remained of his allies, the few diplomats, the fractured remnants of humanity's former leadership, hoping to stop the rebels before they could act. But even as he prepared for the confrontation, doubt gnawed at him. Had he really thought he could stop this? Was there ever a way to avoid the mistakes of the past? As Dorian approached the Resistance's hidden base, the galaxy seemed quieter than ever. The stars above were no longer symbols of hope, but of a broken promise. Humanity's fate had always been tied to its ability to choose its future, but now it seemed that choice would be torn from them once again. He couldn't help but feel responsible. Was he truly the last of humanity? Or had he just delayed the inevitable? When Dorian finally faced the leader of the resistance, a figure he had once known as a fellow diplomat, he saw no remorse in the eyes of the man who stood before him. The leader's cold smile spoke of certainty. He believed in what he was doing, in the idea that the weapon's power would unite the galaxy. And yet, Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that this new empire, this new order, would be just as destructive as the Oraxians had ever been. "You've failed, Dorian," the resistance leader said, his voice cold. "We don't need the universe's permission to create peace. We are humanity's last hope. This galaxy will follow our lead." Dorian's heart broke. The galaxy was once full of potential, full of diversity, full of choice. But now, it seemed to be hurtling toward a new, terrible fate. In his quest to stop the endless cycle of violence, he had inadvertently set the stage for another kind of war. In the final moments, Dorian understood that he could no longer stop this new conflict. He couldn't undo the choices that had been made, nor could he bring peace to the galaxy. But he could make one final statement, one last act of defiance. Before the resistance could activate the weapon, Dorian transmitted one final message across the stars, a message that would echo throughout the galaxy. Are we truly capable of peace? Or are we doomed to continue fighting, forever testing the boundaries of our own humanity? As the transmission ended, Dorian knew that he had done all he could. The galaxy was on the brink of a new war, one that would test the very essence of what it meant to be human. Would they choose peace? Or would they continue down the path of destruction? Only time would tell. But for now, Dorian could only watch as the galaxy fell into the storm that had been brewing for so long.